So there was that thing of what the world perceived in me and what I knew I was. So the reason why I ended up choosing dance was because all of these arts happen through the body, whether it's music or visual art or creative writing, which I also do. All of this happens through the body. So I started to focus on bringing up memories or remembering um, who I am through the body. And this included these creative practices. So that always informs the type of teaching that I do.
Communication now is not going to be only what we say, but also
Yes,
what we do. Even
exactly.
what we do without necessarily showing that we are doing it, but sending the message in a way that somebody who understands the same code can understand us. So
Exactly.
I think this can be really very delicate but highly powerful as a way of reappropriating our culture. Either we will speak the language that the oppressor do not understand.
This connection of freedom to dance is very important to understand because we have to appreciate that slavery and colonization did not just happen as an idea. What happened in those situations was it implicated our bodies directly. It incarcerated our bodies literally and metaphorically. Yes, our bodies became objects under the control of somebody else. My name is Tawanda Chabikwa, and I'm currently a professor of dance and Africana studies here in Texas, and I'm from Zimbabwe originally.
That's lovely. That's lovely.
The-
Now let's look at it this way. How did you get into dancing?
First, when I was growing up, my interest was actually in the sciences, and after getting my scholarships and so forth, when I was in Hong Kong, I finally picked up a paintbrush and I got into visual art. And because I was doing lots of sports and martial arts, at that time, our friends asked me to volunteer for dancing. So I got into dancing sort of sideways, even though I had been doing some ballroom dancing and things like that in Zimbabwe as a child as well. My course of study changed during my undergraduate when I focused on creative practices and nonprofit studies. So I was using the arts in general to raise money for AIDS orphans in Zimbabwe. And that was through visual art, through dance and performance as well, and things of that sort. So for my master's, I ended up getting an MFA in dance. And then for my doctorate, I began in a PhD program for dance and then moved over to a PhD in Africana studies, still focused on contemporary African art and performance culture as well. So that's all this music and dance and visual art of contemporary Africa.
All right. Now, is your dance the kind of dance that you perform? Is it affected by the culture of your origin, which is Zimbabwe, where you are coming from, or is it something that is restricted to the diaspora? In this case, now you are living in the United States. Could you say something about that?
Mm. Well, my form of dance that I work with is certainly influenced by where I'm from, because for me it's very important to carry forth that idea of where you're from in all of one's art and performance. In fact, you can say it's unavoidable. I think you actually have to put more effort into not carrying over things that are from where you are from rather than, it's more difficult not to. So for myself, I realized very quickly in the type of art that I was making, the dance and the music, that I was trying to reach back toward my understanding of personhood from Zimbabwe. Part of the reason I got into these arts was a sense that education was beginning to alienate me from who I was. So I had to physically try to rediscover where I was from and what the meanings of where I was from carry and how they are relevant today. Because I realized in the world, being a global anti-Black world, um, the perception of what Blackness is or what my Black body was around the world did not match my knowledge of who I am. So there was that thing of what the world perceived in me and what I knew I was. So the reason why I ended up choosing dance was because all of these arts happen through the body, whether it's music or visual art or creative writing, which I also do. All of this happens through the body. So I started to focus on bringing up memories or remembering um, who I am through the body. And this included these creative practices. So that always informs the type of teaching that I do. So as I teach dance, I bring in that idea of personhood as I understand it into dance. Because for all of these things, the idea is not just to make something that is aesthetically pleasing, something just to look at and say, oh, that's nice, or something that's just for leisure to say, you know, I can forget about the world for a short while. For me, this music and this dance actually brings us closer to reality. And I tap into those ancestral energies of how this dance, this music, and these creative practices for our peoples was actually a way of becoming more of a person, more deeply engaged in reality, by being more deeply engaged in your community, in the world around you, and also a way of contemplating yourself and the meaning of life and things of that sort. So using art itself in terms of music and so forth is actually tapping into an ancient technology that was used by Africans and other indigenous people to maintain community and to be a part of the universe, to be a part of the cosmos as it is.
All right, now I'm looking at this dance that you do, and of course, you said dance is connected also to music because both of them they are working hand in hand. And so I am beginning to imagine a continuous evolution of a process. Now, that it is not set and is finished; it's continuously evolving. I remember, for example, there is a dance in my place. It is okay. I am from Esan. Esan is in the south of Nigeria. So, in one dance that is very peculiar to the Esan people and also very famous among them is known as Igbabonelimi. Igbabonelimi is an acrobatic dance. Acrobatic dance, of course, is a dance that is very fascinating. When you see the people turning in the air as they are dancing, is so fascinating. I can't even describe it sometimes. So one time in one of my book, I was saying that the person who is dancing, in this case, the acrobat, because they usually will dress in costume. You don't see their faces. They are inside the masquerade. But the mask is different in that there is a lot of cloth in it, so that when they are turning it, that one of their leg will touch the ground at one, then they turn in the air, touch, they turn in the air. And the rhythm of their leg touching the ground is perfectly balanced with the rhythm of the drum. So that the drummer and the dancer are both in sync, perfectly in sync. So this is something that I really find very fascinating. So sometimes some people were doing the research to see where is the origin of this dance, for example. Okay, then there was some study that they did that the dance may have come from maybe the monkey that were dancing in the forest. So a hunter who went to hunt in the night was watching the monkeys dancing, and he so liked it. And when he returned to the village, he taught it to the people in the village, and then they started to dance it, and it's so fascinating. But whether that is actually the truth or that is a romanticized part of the story. I don't know, but there was this documentary that we
Interesting.
actually saw when I was still a child growing up in Uromi, which is my
Uh-huh.
town. So,
Wow. Wow. That's
yeah.
fascinating.
Mhm.
Fascinating.
So,
So,
so have you done a kind of a research like this to find out some of because I'm looking at the value that your heritage have in what you do now, because like you're saying, the dance and the music are not just for entertainment, they are deeper. So I'm trying to see if you have, now that you make it a duty for yourself to practice this and to also teach it, if you have done some research in Zimbabwe or in other Africa to find the root of some of these practices or this dance and yeah.
indeed, indeed. Now, the fascinating thing about the story you've just told me about that dance, the idea may be we may never know whether that story is true or not true in terms of where the dance comes from. But some things to consider is it could be true, but that might also be an oversimplification of where it is from. Also, we have to remember that in terms of ethnography and some of this history, uh, people assume that Africans were so naive as to simply tell uh, the Westerners or the missionaries or the explorers the truth about their deep secrets about their rituals as well. So that's something to consider when we're discussing these ideas of the origins of dances, because some of these dances, their meanings are so deep and esoteric that it would be easier to tell somebody who's not from the culture an easier story about what it means. And hopefully we'll talk about this in a little bit, but your very good observation about the rhythm in dance becomes very important because rhythm is a very important philosophical foundation of African ways of seeing and being in the world. And I also wanted to say another thing that you observed very wisely is that dance and music, they go hand in hand, right? So it's hard to separate the two. And hopefully in this conversation, we'll be able to join the two things as well.
I just wanted to show you some of the dance, or at least to give you a kind of a visual representation of the dance I'm talking about.
Yes,
Okay, just
I
shortly
love
there.
that. I've seen this one before. I've never known its name.
It's
That's fascinating.
it's called Igbabodele. Let me bring out the name for you so that you see how it is spelled. Okay,
Mhm.
that is the YouTube channel where I'm just shooting this from.
Ah,
Okay, yeah.
oh, let me.
Okay, please go. I just wanted to show you
Yes.
that.
Wonderful. I have seen that somewhere. I have never known the name of it. But
Mhm.
yes, I spent a lot of time looking at African traditional dances and African diasporic dances as well. But yes, this idea first, I wanted to say that, dance and music and visual art and creative writing and poetry in Africa, they're not separate. They go hand in hand. So it's important when we discuss these things that we treat them as such as well, which is why I was saying the music is just one part of what I do, the dance is one part of what I do, the visual art, they all come together. Because we must remember, in the African context, if you are a drummer, you are not just a drummer, right? You must also be a sculptor because you must know how to make the drum. You must also be a singer because you must know the songs that you are drumming to, right? And you must know their history and their context, which means you are also a historian, right? But you must also know the dances so you can interact with the dancers to know what they're doing, even when you're improvising, which means you're also a dancer. Indeed. So all of these arts in the African context tend to be mixed into one. We don't really follow the sort of post-Enlightenment European idea of separating these things so much and so far. But then again, we also have a very different relationship to the concept of what art is, right? Which is important to notice and to talk about. But back to this idea of this rhythm. Rhythm is a very important sort of foundational philosophical idea in Africa. and a way of relating to the world, because we can understand that all reality is actually rhythm. Everything is rhythm. Even our bodies are rhythm, right? We wake up, we go to sleep, we wake up, we go to sleep. When we're walking, it's 1, 2, 1, 2. Our breathing, in, out, our heartbeat, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom, and so forth. We also have the rhythm of we eat food, we expel it, we eat food, we expel it. We have the rhythm of day and night. We have the rhythm of cycles of life and death, right? The rhythms of planting things and harvesting and planting and harvesting, even the longer cycles of how civilizations rise and fall and rise and fall. So everything can be understood as rhythm. In this sense, the body itself becomes a microcosm of a greater expression of universal rhythm, right? And sometimes people get very confused when they listen to or hear these drums and rhythms in different parts of Africa, but they fail to understand that deeply philosophical conception of what rhythm means and what rhythm is. And if we look at it in terms of the quantum physics and sciences today as well, we understand even at an atomic level or at a quantum level, many things are rhythms, waves, and vibrations in this sense. So when we are dancing, we are tapping into, we are connecting to that universal energy, that life force that manifests itself as different rhythms, different vibrations, right? And we go to the extent of saying like how solid matter is actually vibrating at a molecular level and things like that, right? That's how solid matter happens. Because it's a condensation of vibration, etc., etc. So in this sense, when Africans say that everything is spirit manifesting, when we connect to rhythm, we can bypass this physical material manifestation and connect to that deeper spiritual or energy level of existence. So that's really what's happening. That's how then people can perform and access these very complicated rhythms in relationship to the world around them, right? So the question is, how does this dancer know when to put the foot down, when to come up? How do they match that rhythm so precisely, so precisely? Unlike in a Euro-Western context, they probably don't go to a studio to practice for 3, 4 hours a day, right? When that ceremony and ritual is happening, then they come out and they do it without having spent, months and months repeating the same thing, because that drumming is partly improvised, even though there's a basic rhythm. But you start to cultivate this capacity to connect to or contribute to various rhythms, right, around you in this way. So again, that idea of personhood that I described, where it's not just about you, but you're connected to things around you as well. And this includes being sensitive to understanding how rhythms work around you as well. And I think that's a very important and fascinating thing to consider. So, in response to this question, yes, I do look at some historical and traditional dances from Zimbabwe, because I love looking into archives of how people's bodies have existed in the past. But here there's a complicated thing that happens. It's important to know that at the birth of colonialism, even under colonization, dance and music were one of the ways in which new national identities were starting to be created for African colonies, if that makes sense. So they had to separate now whatever they had named the places. What are the national dances of, for Zimbabwe's case, it used to be Rhodesia. So what are the national dances for Rhodesia? What are the national dances for Nyasaland? What are the dances for North Rhodesia, South Rhodesia, or whatever things were called at that time? So in that time, many dances were lost and some just fell away into deeper secrets, because they had to be curated now to match the ideas West of what indigenous or traditional dances look like. Because they were doing the same thing they had done in the West of creating national identity through these various creative arts. But the borders they had made were false and different, right? And how could they manage the fact that in many of these countries, many of these tribes were split apart and so forth? they had to start a unification project as best they could to try and make these very dances very clear and so forth. So it's something important to realize that some dances that are considered traditional dances are actually not as old as we think they are, but some of them are, you see. So that's a paradox because some of them still survive, but were not being practiced in popular places where the governments went and things like that. So that's something very important to realize. And this is something I learned very quickly is the invention of African tradition. But this is an invention of tradition that happens globally as well, right? So it's similar to say in Kauai or Hawaii, as people call it. At the point of a certain one of the later queens, the one of her big projects was changing the nature of hula dancing, uh, which changed very much from what the traditional form was to become what hula dancing is as we recognize it today. And she created national competitions for hula dancing and so forth. And these things really changed the way the dances occur. So when I'm researching these African dances, I have to try to go beyond the colonial productions or the colonial changes made of these dances. And it's always very interesting because there are many different oral traditions about where dances come from and what they mean. But when you do enough digging, you start to find common stories from different places that start to point at the deeper meaning of these dances or the original forms of these dances, which then becomes a beautiful thing. Because for me, while I use some traditional forms in my teaching and things of that sort, my focus is really on contemporary African dance. Again, how do we connect that older dance and meaning and music and sound and make it relevant today, right? So my project is not necessarily one of preservation of traditional dances, but continuing to keep African philosophies of the body and art and music and stuff relevant in the body today, to an extent to show that African traditions are still relevant today. African ways of seeing and being in the world are still relevant today. Because the idea is to show that Africans have continued to innovate and grow, right? Rather than they're stagnant and staying in traditional dances, pre-colonial ideas. So now this means it's wonderful because some people do the work of preserving the dances, which is beautiful as well, because we are still in conversation, we're still on the same continuum, right? My interest is how do these dances show us different possibilities of the body today? It's very much connected to, say, the conversation on artificial intelligence that we talked about, right? How can we use this ancient knowledge to make it relevant today in the way we design things concerning technology? I'm asking the same questions with music and dance and visual art, right? How do we show that Africa is still growing and that those ancient ways of thinking and being in the body are still relevant today and can still guide us into the future? So the term that many people use is neo-ancestral, right? So this neo-ancestral art is what I'm really interested in, these neo-ancestral practices, right? There's a wonderful scholar who was one of my mentors, Dr. Horace Ike Newsom, who studied visual art. And he's the one who named or discovered these artists working in Philadelphia in America whose art was so inspired by indigenous African art. And they didn't know why, because they weren't studying African art to go and make their new contemporary art. But somehow, through generations and generations, right, the African aesthetic and the African ways of thinking and being have been preserved, right? Even when they are changed slightly. And we see this story again and again in the African diaspora, how these African ways of doing things are preserved, even when they change. So this African ancestral impulse, he called it, still lives very strongly today. And very often it shapes what musicians are doing, what dancers are doing, and so forth and so forth. So if we look at the work of, Fela Kuti, right? we can see how very much his work was very much traditional. But what was he using? Saxophone, electric guitar, jazz, etc., etc. You see? And his cross influence with the Western world. If we look at high life music, same idea, right? Using those traditional indigenous methods and rhythms and so forth, and translating them into contemporary things. Even with Afro beats today, Afro urban music is the same idea. So I hope that makes sense in what I mean
It makes
by
a lot of
using the
sense.
past to create the future.
It makes a
Yeah,
lot of
very
sense.
much neo-ancestralism is what we're looking for in our approaches. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I think I still have another question to ask while we are still there talking about the past. And then, of course, we come to the present and all that we are doing here. Now, I will go back again to my place, which is Asa, south of Nigeria. Now, I will describe a bit to you what I saw, which is because I see a lot of movement in our dance. No, like for example, the acrobat that I just showed you, no, which is called Ibabonelemi in my place. The one before that one, okay, there are actually three layers of this music of this dance, if you want to call it like that, in my place. The first usually, okay, let's call it four more like, but the first one is actually not really music. Now, in the first one, which is usually in the evening, we hear young people, because all of us participated in this one, start making sound, making a sort of sound that let the people know that in the night there is going to be dance, there's going to be music. But this type of music is not for everybody. Women are not supposed to be there. Young people are not supposed to be there. They are for mature people. And the music is so organized in such a way that it is deep. I want to repeat that word. It is really deep. The sound that they make, that they communicate to you, that it is produced with instrument, so that when you turn the instrument with a rope tied together, it produces a sort of sound. Like you just roll it on top of your head. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not a disorganized noise. If you listen very well, there is a message being passed. But in a very high sound of something very small, but process, just turn it like that. We call that dance elimoto. Elimoto will now mean like spirit that come from the ground.
Yes.
Okay, this is why also it's for, because it's hidden in secrecy, that particular music, which is the first part of the three. Women are not allowed to go out in the night. Young people are not allowed to go out in the night because you are not supposed to see those people that are singing. Now, where I'm going to later is I'm trying to see the connection between dance and music and spirituality. So I would like you to respond to that. But now let me also add another thing to it. When this is done, then you have the day one, during the afternoon. This afternoon, we have a different type of masquerade that are called the Okpodu. Okpodu are the regular type of masquerade. You see them all across the Yoruba, across the Igbo, in Benin. They are the same type that they dress in touch material that are prepared for them. And then they run. We hold a stick. Then, of course, the stick, they will use it to flog the young women on. So that what is happening between the young women and the young men that are dressed in the masquerade, you can call it a romance. That is a dance, because the young women will sing for the Obodu, for the masquerade, and the masquerade will reiterate that if you are not smart enough to run, if he catches you, he's going to flog you.
Yeah.
So we all know what we are doing. It's a game. Now it's very interesting. It's one of the most interesting dance that we have around in Islam. Now, when that is done, around 4, 5 o'clock, the last one, which is the acrobatic dance, like I showed you, the Okpodu, which is the afternoon dance, is done running around the entire village. Yeah. But the evening type is done only in one place. It's done at the village square, where everybody will gather, knowing that there's going to be a dance. And is so enticing, so interesting, is so beautiful. Now,
Wonderful.
this is
Yeah.
my question. This thing that we are doing now, this exercise that we are doing now, that we are calling dance and we are calling music, if I am reading it now, I can see that deep messages can actually be passed across here. Culture are being preserved, information are being passed to people, and of course to those who can understand. So the
Yeah.
curiosity, therefore, is what is the connection between these and spirituality?
Well, first of all, if you remember the description of personhood that I explained, that idea of the extended self, that was articulated quite well by this African American psychologist, Dr. Wade Nobles. This idea of myself is not just my body and my skin around me. Myself actually includes my family, my community, my society, nature, all of creation. It also includes my ancestors, and it includes the unborn. Yes. And that is what I consider my actual self, right? And rhythm is the way in which all of these things are happening all together, all at once through me, right? And within me, I can access these things that are inside of me and around me. I can also access things that are beyond time and space, right? The ancestors and the unborn, because they are within me. Yes. I simply need to arrive at the same, let's say, wavelength of vibration, if you will, along with them, or the same state of consciousness, right? That will allow me that access to them, right? So, number one, how a message is translated and transformed. When colonialism happened, one of the ways in which Africans were seen as people without a history was by people who did not understand the value of symbol and rhythm and storytelling in terms of maintaining history. Yes, that history could be maintained through storytelling within the body, not just using words. That certain types of knowledge can only be accessed through the body, not through words, by physically participating in these rituals, in these dances, in these communal performances. I learned something about the ancestors and where I am from by participating in these practices that have happened for thousands of years. I then become connected to the ancestors, right? Because we're doing the same dances and the same movements that they did. Therefore, we are connecting to and experiencing very similar modes of knowing as they did while they were doing those dances or while they were participating in watching those dances as community, participating in the singing and the dancing and just the music itself. And I hope that makes very clear sense that there are certain ways of knowing that can only be accessed through the body. Through colonialism and things, we've been fooled to think that all knowing just happens up here, right? Just in the brain. And sometimes some people might say just also in the heart. But most people think, and yes, they think just the brain, right? But what we understand as Africans is the entire body thinks. The entire body is a brain. The entire body can maintain memory, can connect to memory. Physical knowledge, kinesthetic knowledge, right, is actually a way of knowing. And rhythm is one of the ways of accessing this. So just that first point, that these stories and ways of knowing are actually a mode of passing down history and knowledge that is an actual technology that we've had for centuries, right, in Africa. And that is very important that we don't lose that as an aspect of our personhood. In terms of spirituality, as I mentioned, with that sense of personhood and understanding that everything is spirit, you understand that you too are spirit. And you have these practices that can expand your way of seeing beyond just the senses of your body, right? To higher senses. And also let it be known that we are taught in school that we have how many senses? That we have five senses. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Right?
that's what
Touch,
we are told.
taste, da, da, da. Yeah, that's what we're told. But scientifically, and I encourage people just to Google this question or look it up online, how many senses do we have? We actually have more than 23 senses physically, right? Beyond the five. And in our body, there are things like thermoceptors that are only there to measure temperature, not just touch. There are things that are there to measure pressure, things that measure balance. Balance is a sense as well of the body. Things that measure so many different things, humidity, and etc., etc. So we have many different senses, so many of them. And for some reason, they've been reduced to five in our education, you see. So, how do we then access all of those? When we live in more embodied ways, we start to realize that the body can help us access ways of knowing that are much deeper than our attachment to this purely material world. We start entering into the realm of spirit, that which connects everything. This is how I'm defining spirit, as that which connects everything, right? That which is much closer to the source of creation, right? Be it the creator, the creative being, if you want it to be that, or just creation itself. Because we are letting go of our obsession and attachment to the purely material. We become more sensitive to what is happening beyond our bodies, our physical material bodies. We start to understand what it means to be participating in the cosmos, to be participating in the universe, rather than in our smaller, shallower, if I might say so, material lives of pay taxes and die economics, make money, get more and more material things, all of this, right? We start to understand higher things, higher purposes. And very much people sometimes enter into different states of consciousness, so it's called, right? And they have different names for different aspects of it. But some of these physical feats that people perform are sometimes difficult to explain, right? In terms of science. Like, how can people be dancing for 4 hours nonstop without dying of exhaustion, you know, and doing very difficult things like this? Sometimes people jump higher than is normally possible. Sometimes people are walking on fire or things of that sort. Sometimes people start to do impossible feats. Right. Sometimes people's personalities are transposed with other people's personalities. I think they call it possession in the Western world. But, these transpositions of personality and information that are very strange. And that's very much, again, connecting to that fundamental understanding of what the world is as an African, is that everything is spirit manifesting, indeed. So that's my contribution to that context or that idea, basically.
Thank you so much for that. You see, there is a high value in the conversation here, and I really appreciate you. I appreciate your contribution here. You see, most of the things that you are explaining now, because our education is destroyed, that is why it will be strange for people. Because
Yes,
otherwise, you really didn't need to go to a classroom to understand this information. You just
yes,
understand it because you are living it.
exactly,
Because
exactly.
our education was part of our life. That you are not supposed to just go to school for 8 years. You are supposed to go to school for your entire life.
Yes, yes. And you're very right, because that also shows like the relationship to knowledge, right, is different. Just like the relationship to personhood is different in Africa. The relationship to knowledge in a Euro-Western context is you go to school, then you go to high school, then you go to university. That's how knowledge happens. And that's where you go to get knowledge. In Africa, knowledge is a living tradition. Knowledge is a living tradition, right? There's a wonderful philosopher from Africa, historian, etc., etc., Amadou Hampate Ba, and he's from Mali, I believe. And he writes some wonderful things explaining this idea of what knowledge is and understanding that knowledge is really a living tradition in Africa. That's how it's viewed. And the whole person must be immersed in this living tradition in order to accrue and gain knowledge through community, through elders, through family, through nature. And there are multiple directions from which knowledge comes by living within the cosmos with all these elders and traditions to guide you. in accruing that knowledge. So that's very, very important to actually appreciate, because also education and knowledge in their origins, in Africa at least, they were considerably connected to spirituality, right? The first quote unquote universities were in Timbuktu, actually. Of course, the model of university we follow nowadays is based on German university models. But in those Timbuktu places of universities, there was no separation between learning science, math, and so forth, along with spirituality and theology and philosophy, because they all go together, right? And so it was in other parts, even prior to universities. Understanding the world came with an understanding of the sacredness of the world. And without understanding that the world is sacred, you're considered an idiot, right? You're considered, you don't know anything, right? If you don't think the world is sacred, or if you don't know that the world is sacred. So it's no surprise that even some of the greatest Western scientists were very spiritual people, or very much connected or intrigued by the idea of mystical things and mysticism, right? And this goes to your Einsteins and your Newtons and so forth. Understanding that we live in awe of a very mysterious world, right, was not in contradiction to learning about the material world, because that is also a manifestation of spirit. And again, it also gives you that intellectual humility and spiritual humility to keep learning and to keep learning. So that is true. So dance, again, is a way of knowing, right? Dance and music, and also making things, visual art. These are ways of knowing the world and participating in the cosmos, because you are creating, just like the divine force or the divine principle works in the universe through creating. And in doing so, you then access what is true power. Because again, power, as we discussed in a previous episode, is not about destroying things, do things, right? Power from an African conception is really one's capacity to create and to sustain life. When you are making music, you are participating in that creative energy, the ultimate energy, right? And by sustaining rhythms, by working together to sustain an entire day or evening of dances, you are also sustaining that which you have created. So that is actual power. You are tapping into actual universal power, right? Through these rhythms, through coming together to create these gatherings as well.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Creation, dancing, and music. But anyway, dancing now. And
Mm,
because you have explained the basis, you have helped to set the background of the information that is embedded in this movement. Let's
mm,
look at us that are away from Africa. So the African diaspora, therefore. Uh,
mm,
how important do you see, or what are the importance of dance in a way to sort of connect and preserve our culture?
mm. I will say one important thing is freedom, self-expression, and self-liberation, because we have to appreciate the power of dance and its connection to freedom directly. This connection of freedom to dance is very important to understand, because we have to appreciate that slavery and colonization did not just happen as an idea. What happened in those situations was it implicated our bodies directly. It incarcerated our bodies, literally and metaphorically. Yes, our bodies became objects under the control of somebody else. And in that context, as part of the erasure and the destruction of African ways of knowing, were these bans and restrictions around our music and around our dancing. Yes. And even around our basic mobility, being able to walk from point A to point B without holding a pass, right, from a white person. You see? Not being allowed to do our religious and spiritual dances. Therefore, because dancing is a way of knowing and remembering, therefore cutting off our memories and our knowledge. of where we are from and of who we are. Same thing with our music and things of that sort. Just that idea of consistently implicating our bodies, right, in this project of colonization and slavery. So, what is the importance of this knowledge for us if we're in the diaspora? Is to stay connected to who we are. I would suggest always finding a way to go to places where people are dancing, right? And let them be various African dances. I would say it doesn't matter which one. And in most places you go, there's quote unquote African dance somewhere. Of course, you must be specific. Are they teaching dances from Mali, from Senegal, from Nigeria, from South Africa? But I believe even connecting as somebody from the diaspora to just going to take some of those classes, right? To be in a context where your body, your neo-ancestral body has access to these ways of knowing through the body, right? It's a way of decolonizing your own body. And that is just as important as decolonizing your mind, because the body was the first site of colonization, right? And incarceration. And even as we travel around in the West, there are certain ways you need to carry your body, right? Have you ever noticed how when you go back home, people even walk differently, right, than they do in Italy where you are, right? In the US, I've noticed people walk differently,
But what is responsible for that?
right? Exactly. That is that physical incarceration of the body historically, that controlling of the body. Now we must perform our bodies along the lines of how whiteness wants us to perform the bodies, right? Have you ever noticed just how differently people walk, right? I've noticed it in the US how people walk very differently, right? Including the difference between, you know, African diaspora people walking and people from Africa walking as well, and things of that sort. You can tell how the body just manifests itself differently. And that's very simple, and it's easy to not notice that, right? How people carry themselves in their bodies. Imagine for generations if your body is being controlled to behave in such a way, and that's passed down generation to generation to generation. That is an example of loss of self, right? How do you even know how to express happiness physically, right? If you must always be living under the gaze of somebody else, controlling how you see the world and how you behave in the world. So these are things that are very important. Physically freeing yourself. And that means when you dance, we do different dances. Yes, also you can do the waltz and dances like that. They're also fun, right? But they're essentially not African, which is absolutely okay because Africans can travel the world. It's important to connect to the dances that really move and free our body in specific ways because that's how ideology is passed down, right? If I can give a quick example of the difference between, of one example of the difference between Europeanist and African dance that helps to show what I mean by dance is a way of knowing the world. What do you think of when you think of ballet and the dance of ballet?
When I okay ballet, I would difference. I would say okay, this is a European music, a European dance. Sorry, a
Yes,
European
and music
movement.
as well.
Yeah.
Indeed. You even imagine already the music, right, that goes with it. Classical Western music, European movement, and what happens in it, right? There's lots of use of very straight lines with their body, very straight lines, and their body is floating upward, and they're extending their legs and things. Their face is either very neutral or very pleasant, just smiling very subtly and slightly. And their hands, very soft hands and things of that sort. The feet are always pointing, and it's almost like they're floating or flying, right? And that's absolutely fine. But can we understand the cultural ideas that come with that? The idea of what is beautiful, right? Because in ballet, you also see the global European aesthetic and understanding of what is beautiful, even in the bodies that do ballet. the bodies must be very specifically something, right? They must be rather skinny, slender. They don't have too many curves, right? They shouldn't be too tall. It's preferable if they are smaller bodies, etc., etc. And also, it's preferable if they are white bodies or light-skinned bodies. And the bodies must look the same with the same hairstyle, etc., etc. And so it goes. This type of aesthetic can be traced back to Europe, right? And we're talking to the ideas of Louis the Sun King, and even before that, these ideas of French and European nobility and their ideas of what was meant to be beautiful, right? Things that everyone aspired to, right? Moving from the court dances that they had, from certain military ideals they had, and also to their religious ideals. Because in ballet, the use of the line and the circle is connected to the Victorian idea of the spheres of heaven and morality and so forth. And to them, they thought a body doing something was an indication of its moral character as well, right? So you should be able to tell who a noble is versus who a peasant is. But also you can tell a person's morality. So children would be sent to train in moving like a noble, right? So your body has to perform this. Now, if we switch over and we look at various African dance movements and so forth, the aesthetic is rather different. And again, Africa is very broad, but you can see certain differences that resonate from place to place, no matter where you are. And there are certain dancers who broke this down. There's Kariamu Welsh Asante broke it down. There's Brenda Dixon Goschild broke it down. Richard Faris Thompson. These are some scholars who broke down this Africanist aesthetic of movement. And some things are very common about it, right? Some people go straight to African dances are grounded, right? So your center of gravity is kept kind of low and in connection to the ground. Also, things don't have to have straight lines. Actually, we prefer to break the line and to isolate body parts when we're moving, right? We have something that they call polyrhythm. So you never just dance to one rhythm, right? The whole body is never just doing one rhythm, but different body parts are doing different rhythms. Your head is doing one thing, your hips are doing one thing, your shoulders doing another thing, your feet are doing something else. Indeed. And that also means polycentricity, multiple centers of the body. So it's not just one body part that takes the entire show, as you see. And then there are many other things, right? Our use of energy, right? We really like dances that are powerful, even when they're soft, but that are vibrating with lots of like energy inside, right? Which is very different from ballet, where you must always look relaxed, like nothing's happening, like there's no effort, right? And so forth. But Africanist aesthetic, they call it ephebism, right? What's going on with that vibration of energy on the inside? And we could go on and on with these very clear Africanist aesthetics, right? Some of them they call it juxtaposition, right? Very big contrast between things. We like to see bright colors versus dark colors on the same costume. When somebody is jumping, they're jumping from high to low, then they go down on the ground, they go up. Very big contrasts, right? Between things. Contrast between emptiness and quiet and loud. And these things continue to happen. But what we're saying is these aesthetics show a way of relating to the world, right? What do you think of a culture that wants all the dancers to look the same and to wear the same clothing, right? And the exact same clothing and to do the exact same movements? This is a culture that wants people to be more separate in their aesthetic. Even when they're doing the same thing, you can still tell that they're individuals. And it doesn't really matter what type of body the person has, they can still participate in the movement and the dance as long as they do it well and joyfully and so forth. What do you think happens in such a mind? What do you think people are being trained for? Right? And don't get me wrong, I really love any dance and every dance in the world, and I study it. But if we're thinking of how the body shapes the mind or represents things that are going on in the mind, which culture do you think is more likely or prone to wanting to colonize others or turn others into slaves?
Well, it's obvious, and you have to do also with the limitation, no, with the
You
limit that
see,
that is a lack.
you see, this
Not the
idea of,
globalness. Okay, yeah. We
yeah,
get
right.
it.
You see, so these connections can be made, right? Even when Hitler was creating his version of Germany, he also implicated the body and created national dances, mass movements, right? Where everyone was supposed to look the same and be doing the exact same dance and so forth, right? And also went to design what is the perfect looking German, right? Hence the stereotype of the blue-eyed, blonde-haired, even though he wasn't that himself, right? Creating these ideals. The body is always point number one of oppression. The body must be oppressed, it must be locked up, incarcerated, tied down, it must be controlled, or it must be beaten into submission or put to death, right? So this is where the stakes of the body are, because that's where things happen. Indeed. That's the first thing that needs to be dominated in any situation. And typically, the ways of domination was one, put it to death, so the other bodies around are afraid of dying, so they obey orders. Number two, put it in pain, so that it will obey what you are doing. Number three, control resources, right? Starve it or make it be in hunger, right? Or be in control of the resources that keep it comfortable, clothing, housing, etc., etc. Indeed, right? And the other thing, number four, isolate it or make it believe it is isolated, right? So that way it believes it cannot get power from anything around it, but it is completely at your mercy. And so it goes. So when you do dance and you enjoy dance, you are participating in a political act. When you do traditional dances, right, of wherever you are from, you are participating in a political act that goes in direct opposition to the project of colonialism and imperialism, because you are choosing to connect yourself to where you are from. You are choosing to not let go of your ways of knowing and your identity. You are choosing to align yourself with your community and your identity and who you are. Indeed, you are choosing to participate freely in the world, not according to their rules, right? And also, you can learn their rules. That's not a problem. But you don't have to give up who you are to learn their rules, you see. And that's the big thing right there. Right. So dancing, music, and these creative expressions that are neo-ancestral or even the ancestral ones that we maintain, they are our ways to freedom. They are our sustaining our freedom and continuing to tell them we are here, we are who we are.
I like the idea that you can actually use dance as a way of expressing yourself, as a way of showing your liberty, your freedom, that you are not restricted anymore. You are not in a cage. You are
Yes.
free to live.
Yeah.
And also some of the dynamics that you were explaining about the different type of the different lines that are even in the dance that we don't often see. Those are really very fascinating. Looking at the European music, looking at ballet, for example, or the high energy music of the Africans, and what
Mhm.
where those are coming from and what do they even represent. You could even look at,
Mhm.
for example, maybe the parade that often go on, whether during the military, or maybe, for example, when the Korea or even the United States or many other countries, they line up children in a football pitch, and this choreography that is so perfectly done. Somebody look at it as
Yes.
very innocent dance, but that is a deep secret message that is actually be hidden there to synchronize everybody. I really find it
Very
very
much so.
fascinating, your explanation here. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
Very much so, yes. And there's actually a word by a French theorist called biopolitics, right? Or biopower. The way in which power is enacted upon the body through controlling the body and taking away the autonomy of the body, right? And this manifests in many different ways. So when people say, you study dance, what do you study? You just go and dance? No, actually, when we study dance, we study all of these theories of the body and how it works in the world. And we look at the entire world as dance. So you are right when you say the military lines are a great example, because in that training, of unison, right? And working in absolute synchronicity, the same ideas of discipline and control are happening there. You become one body among thousands of bodies, indistinguishable from another, right? All obedient, marching to the same beat. So that metaphor is funny when we say, oh, they march to the same beat. Yes, exactly. That's what's happening. You are being trained to march to the same beat, to follow commands. Turn left, turn right. 1,000 of you will turn left at the same time, turn right at the same time. So when somebody says fire, you will all fire at the same time. No question. You're being conditioned for that. You're also being conditioned to work in terms of teamwork, right? Or under one idea, whatever that idea is that's coming from the top. So it's very hierarchical as well. And it's very clear and it's obvious, right? The same thing happens now in all of these different choreographies. What is trying to be achieved? But let's understand that these things happen from the time we were children. Yes? So colonial education is also biopolitical, right? For instance, when we know the ideas of I don't know if you experienced this or not, but in Nigeria, but this idea of when you're children, elementary school, you go into class, right? First, what they do, they make you wear uniforms, right?
We did
So you
it.
look like them.
We did.
That's one way of controlling the body, right? Just like in ballet, all wear the same thing and whatnot. Yes, so you wear the little uniforms. So your body is being controlled in that way now already because you're not wearing the clothing that reminds you who you are. So that's one level of taking away. Then they sit you in lines, right? At your desk, you're sitting in lines. Do you know that straight lines do not occur in nature? Straight lines are highly unnatural. Everything always has a little something, a little bend, right? You never see even in molecules just one long line like this. Either it's a spiral, it's something. But no, they sit you in straight lines, which is one of the most unnatural formations. And you're all doing what? You're facing the front, not facing each other. So everyone else is not important. What's important is from there, and that you all listen to what's there, right? So that's mind being controlled. And when the teacher comes in, you all stand up and you, good morning, sir. Oh, ma'am. And whatnot, right? You stand to attention, blah, blah. That's it. You're already being trained that this is something. This is something, right? And I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, but just understand that the body is implicated from day one, indeed, into what is right, what is wrong, what is expected from you to participate in a cultural ideology. So when we look at dances, it is very important to understand, right, why they are banned. When we look at music, we understand now why it is banned, right? Because these are expressions of individuality or of communal cultures that were not in alignment with things, right? You know, jazz music was banned, rock music was banned, various modes of black music that were not even traditional music throughout history were banned and so forth, right?
And
Because
why were they banned? What were they really representing? Kind of a threat to the system?
well, partly this idea of, again, forming a cohesive national identity, right? And in that cohesive national identity, it's better if you are not fully self-expressed. You must express what is wanted by whoever is in charge, by the dominant force that exists. So if these things remind you of freedom and so forth, there's a fear by those in power that they will lose control of you as a crowd if you participate in these things that continually remind you of freedom. You will unite around these things. Yes? And throughout the history of the United States, this has been a thing, right, of banning things. Now they're banning books, etc., etc. But any free expression of storytelling, of passing ways of knowing around, of knowing the world in a different way, is seen as dangerous if somebody wants to control you, right? So dances were banned, right? Jazz dances, blues dances, rock dance, so many dances were banned, and so forth. For what? We don't know, but we actually do know. Because dance is a way of knowing, music is a way of knowing. You feel specific things when you listen to music, right? You feel specific things when you do certain dances, right? And a big part of that is feeling dimensions of being human that those in charge may not want you to feel, because they know that the body and the mind are connected, that the body can influence the mind, and the mind can influence the body. In fact, the body is the mind. They are one thing. So that's an idea, right? And notice whenever things are considered dangerous, that's when you can understand how powerful they are, right?
All right. Now, when you look into dance, you see, again, we could actually take the argument even also to the time of enslavement, no? And we could, I usually make this comparison between, because I usually do this in terms of comparing how powerful storytelling can be for people, because it can help you to reframe or reshape a narrative, and that narrative will not condition how you are going to behave. But if you don't allow people to aggregate, to tell story, now they are not able to use that energy that they're supposed to have in common. But the Africans who were enslaved were pretty really powerful in that they could organize even a revolt in front of the master slave owner. And the slave owner would never know. Why? Because they don't speak in the language they will understand. They will, even though they have been broken down, some of them still have snippet of their story that is not written in the textbook. Because the
Yeah.
European are trying to look for this secret in the textbook, but the textbook is not there. If the textbook
Yeah.
were there, they would have read all of them and burn it down. But the
Exactly.
Africans' knowledge is in the head. And I believe
Yes.
also through dance too. Because
Yes.
communication now is not going to be only what we say, but also
Yes.
what we do. Even
Exactly.
what we do without necessarily showing that we are doing it, but sending a message in a way that somebody who understands the same code can understand us. So
Exactly.
I think this can be really very delicate but highly powerful as a way of reappropriating our culture. Either we will speak the language that the oppressor do not understand. Yes.
Yes, very much so, very much so. And it's great that you mentioned that because in this liberation struggle, the ongoing liberation struggle for African descendants in the diaspora, music and dance and this coded way of being was very, very important, right? And the intelligence of that was, despite all of the different things that were banned, the types of music and dance that were banned, these African descendants were able to and continue to be able to use the things that are allowed to change them into their own versions for self-empowerment, if that makes sense. So if you are forced to be Christian and you are made to sing these Christian hymns and so forth, these spirituals, those were actually then used as well, right? To become code and language and changing of things towards the changing of circumstances and situations as well, right? The dances that were allowed as well on certain days also became moments of interaction and passing back and forth of codes and messages as well. So the idea is this, that impulse toward freedom can never be extinguished, right? And also because you can never completely destroy that which is the person. You can destroy the body, but personhood cannot be destroyed. Because when this idea of personhood that is extended happens, we realize that you can kill one body, but the knowledge, like you said, that lives within us lives not just in one individual body. It lives within us communally. And it also lives beyond time because it's connected to our ancestors and to the unborn, right? As one person says, there's if you live in a materialist world, you can actually believe in world domination, that you can conquer the world. But if you live in a spiritual world, you know that you can never win because spirit cannot be regulated. How are you going to arrest somebody's ancestors, right? How are you going to arrest ancestors or stop them from sending messages to those who are alive, right? How are you going to stop the unborn from inspiring those who are living right now? You see, the spirit cannot be regulated. And that is where our understanding of personhood lies as Africans, right? In a very big way. And that is the ongoing power of music and dance.
Thank you so much for that. I think that is why they continuously are on their effort of telling us what to do, what to eat, what to wear, who to talk to, how many
Yes.
children to have, and all of
Yes.
the jargon that they are doing. But
Indeed.
like you said, maybe they don't realize it, but some people do, is that this war is beyond you. This fight that you are fighting is beyond you. You are not going to
Mm-hmm.
win. Because, I was saying the other day that nature is going to have a way of rebalancing the system, and nature is beyond you.
Yes.
So be prepared. If you have killed somebody, the Nigerians will say, you don't price, you go pay.
There we go. Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
Exactly.
Indeed.
So the European, in their consciousness, believe that they will have a way of going scot-free for what they have done. But there is no way.
Mm,
You are going
that
to
is
pay
true.
for your crime.
That
And
is
nat-
very true.
yeah, yeah. And nature is going to make sure that you pay for it. Whether you pay today or you pay 2,000 years from now, is not going to go unpunished. And this is, I think,
Indeed.
relate also to the personhood, the realization that we are all one. We are all one also means that we should all be conscious of the fact that what comes around goes around. So you
Yes.
cannot take what does not belong to you. You will pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
that is what they
That is
try to do by all this preemptive attack on other people and telling them, oh, they don't want them to rise. But they are rising. The time for them to rise is going to come. I don't even try to say, to speculate about military intervention in Europe by Africans. But
mm,
that one too, when the time comes, we're probably not going to need nuclear weapon. So that is what English were doing for a number of years. That is what NATO stand for. Oh, we are going to defend Europe. But hey, listen. You are designing a weapon to fight a war that has not yet started. And the consequence of that is that those weapons are going to decay in your land. So they are going to be useless for you. The
yeah.
time has not come. We are not yet determined, Africa has not yet determined how it's going to punish you for your crime yet. So don't worry, the time hasn't come. It's not time to prepare yet.
Indeed, indeed. And also think about it this way. It's not even that Africa doesn't even have to punish them, because there's a way in which the world works in which, you are punished by your sins, not for your sins. You are punishing yourself. You are punished by your sins. So and this is the thing, right? There's no need to buy into trying to create that fear, which I think Europe has, that at some point all of the colonies and whatnot will revolt, the people will try to kill them and what. No, these things just happen organically. Because as you continue on a path of violence, right, according to the universal laws of fortune and misfortune, if you continue on a path of violence, you are actually just creating your own prison, and the walls are closing in around you, right? Because now you must roam the world paranoid, worried about all the things that you've done, and waiting for, what do they say, for the shoe to drop or the shoe to fall, waiting for something to happen. And you'll walk around seeing enemies and so forth. But those who have not done any harm to you or anything, they'll be living peacefully, and you'll come to your own destruction. We've seen some of those stories. Have you seen those stories where kings or whatever eventually go mad or crazy in their castle out of paranoia and fear and whatnot, and somehow end up killing themselves in one way or another? It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that, right? At some point, these societies will implode. So the idea, though, however, right? Because again, whiteness and Europeanness is no longer about skin color or being a direct biological descendant. This is why the matter of decolonizing the mind and decolonizing the body is important, because you don't want to inherit the histories and the past of a violent past of slavery and colonialism, right? So when some people in the diaspora or even in Africa start to obey the rules of whiteness and to perpetuate the rules that have been applied by white bodies historically, you're also participating in the karma, right? Of that as well. So this idea also goes similarly to corrupt African leaders. It also goes to corrupt Latin American leaders, to everyone who continues to sell Africa and other places to the West, right? To anyone who believes that Africa is inferior, even if you are Black and you believe in African inferiority and are choosing to embody these other ideals, you'll become a part of that as well. So this is why, like, decolonizing the mind, decolonizing the body, very, very important, right? Because again, you want to live in such a way that moves towards harmony always. And by participating in these African traditional practices, right, even the neo-ancestral practices, you stay connected and you can keep learning about our own ideas of what is good and what is not good, right? And how to live and how to participate in the world in ways that are healthy, in ways that are communal.
In the last conversation, you said something very beautiful. I think you're also around there now, which is the idea that nobody's actually going to come after you. You are going after yourself.
Yes.
And I think that I would say in my place, the adage in Esan that Udoa wogbe okitobo va. So that when the rock is too hard, that nothing else can touch it from the outside, the rock will break itself.
Yes.
So this is a consciousness that we need to have, that if you are a good person, if your God is good, if you want to believe is good, do what is good. You should know what is good, because you will eventually reap that good.
Yes.
But if you are evil, if you are bad, if your consciousness is bad, if your energy is bad, you will continuously do what is bad, and one day you will end up bad, because it means your evil have caught up against you or are caught up with you.
Yes.
So nobody is going to punish you. You will punish yourself for what you have done, because you are not yet mature.
Exactly. And that's very important, because even when we speak about the body and dance and what was done to the body in the name of slavery and colonialism, notice that much of this was also done in the name of a Christian God. You see? And that's something very important to realize. When people also did not just colonize and enslave, like I said before, they didn't just colonize and enslave other parts of the world. They also colonized and enslaved God and the idea of God. You see? Now, in that sense, they themselves, working paradoxically, have created a God that will judge them for what they have done. They've designed their own destiny, right? But through their insanity and cognitive dissonance, you see, so this cyclicalness just comes back on itself. So even when dances and songs were being banned and things, right, they were claiming this under their Christian God or under whichever God they chose, and so forth, to enact violence on others. Indeed.
Yeah, it's an art of immaturity. Because when you are mature, you will know that the only thing that you need to do is good, because then you are moving towards good, because then you are reaping what you sow. You can't plant yam and pretend to reap corn. The universe does not allow that to happen.
Exactly, right. And it's that idea, speaking of like why music and why dance, when we speak of the universal rhythm and the cosmos, that becomes in time an African understanding of morality, right? There are certain natural laws. We can call them the divine principle, as it is. Or, for instance, the what is it? What do they call it? The Buddhists might call it the Tao, right? Or karma or dharma. But there's a divine principle and things that simply make sense, natural laws, like you say. You don't plant yam and expect to get corn, right? You don't go to a banana tree looking for a mango. These things are very simple, indeed, right? So along those natural laws are these laws that ensure that your actions have repercussions. The rhythm of the cosmos, because it is rhythm, it means it will always circle around back, right? into a new permutation of itself. And that's the importance of rhythm as well as understanding how things work, right? So the rhythm is not the beat as much as the space in between the beat. What you do in those spaces in between the beats, that's where the dance is, right? Because the beat will always circle back around to itself. So depending on your action on that rhythm, what will happen in that beat when it comes back will be up to you, very much up to you.
I really appreciate that. Now, how can we use dance? Maybe now you are speaking to the African diaspora. How can we use dance as a way to better express ourselves and maybe not be ashamed of what the people around you are saying or seeing? Because again, if you are trying to appease the people who sometimes don't even care about you, they don't care about you. You are
Yes.
in prison. You are a slave because you are trying to appeal. You get money to buy dress to appeal to people who don't care about you. It means you are not free. So how
Yes,
could we
that is
use
very true.
dance to really express ourselves? Not because we want to show to somebody else, but because we are free. Flower is celebrating nature by just being flower, by just flourishing.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the reason why dance is important, why we should dance, right? Because we understand that we just simply want to participate in the beauty of who we are. And it is very much that simple. But I also think one of the challenges, right, particularly on the African continent, and this may be controversial to some, is the prevalence, predominance, or the great rise over the last 2 decades or so of um, evangelical Christianity or Pentecostal evangelical Christianity that seems to have also carried over the colonial view that all things that are Black and African are bad. Now, this is a challenge because this is a consistent thing. And this is where I think decolonization of the mind is important. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not speaking against any religion, right? But how those
Of course, we
religions
can
manifest.
speak against this sometimes because they have
Yes.
done so much evil that we
Oh,
can look at
exactly.
it.
So just like we talk about the paradox of Western Christians coming over and doing so much violence to Africans and so forth, uh, we can say Christian evangelical beliefs at times do the very same thing that slavery and colonialism did, and it's doing the job for them in Africa, right? What they're doing is showing up and doing what the European Christians did, but now we're doing it to ourselves, seeing ourselves as the heart of darkness, seeing ourselves as evil, seeing and people really do this to a great extent. Violent protests, etc., while you're paying your pastor millions to harass your own African people, right? And to manifest this self-hate. And I think that's a very important thing to figure out. And a lot of people have to do that internal work, right? Because when we talk about that mental incarceration, it's very important to understand. And I always say this when I talk about Europe, I'm not just talking about white bodies anymore. The world is too interconnected, and we spend too much time in these eras of slavery and colonialism that the ideology has spread like a virus. You can find it in any human body, right? You can find whiteness and Europeanness and colonial ideals in anybody of any race, and they will carry that project forward as if it's their own. You see, you will see people today in Africa saying they will die fighting what they view as witchcraft and so forth, telling their children, don't go to those dances or ceremonies. It's Satanism. Satanism. I love how they say it so passionately. This idea and the funny thing is, they don't even know their own histories and cultures, just what they've been taught by Christians, you see, by colonial version Christians. And their sense of Africa is basically a white version. They are the new colonizers of their own home, right? And also, they don't see the purely economic reasons, right, for some of the actions that Christianity has done historically. Even these crusades and things that were political, the funny thing is, in the as is written in the book of Hosea, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Everyone has so many opinions and so little knowledge, right? And that's why this is important also. We need to keep the knowledge going. And in order to have that knowledge, because part of knowledge as we understand it in Africa, it's a living tradition. It must be embodied. When we do these dances, when we play this music, when we listen to this music, we will understand things about ourselves, like you say, that are not in textbooks, that cannot be passed on via language, right? Sitting in a classroom in a very big way. And I think that's important.
Now, when you talk of the evangelical and the work that they are doing in Africa, I want to call it work. Actually, the destruction that they are doing in Africa, because they are actually a replicant of Carnegie Wesley described in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, that
Yes.
when you perfectly come to understand that you are a slave, that your position is a back door, nobody tells you anymore. When you walk into the house, you go to the back door because
There we
that
go.
is your position.
Yes, it's automatic after a while.
Now, I think these people are actually more dangerous than the European in that now, okay, I say that to mean this. In Africa, in fact, all the time that we can actually think of our record, I don't remember, or perhaps I have not yet noticed it, or I have not yet come to that information, where a European army have gathered as European and attack African people. Of course, maybe the exception of Ethiopia. And of course, they didn't win that war.
Yeah.
I am saying that to me, we Africa don't even have the identity, don't even have the picture of who we are dealing with. If you are looking at, for example, the killing of Martin Luther King is a little bit different. Michael Myers, what about Thomas Sankara? We will usually see another African pulling the trigger. There is always a Negro in the house.
Yes, yes, indeed. So when you say,
how can we move forward like this? I think that is how we have the perplexity.
yeah, like when you say, perhaps what is more dangerous than the European, is the African or Black person in that situation. I will go even further to say what I'm trying to say is now that African person is the European. You see my point? And that is when colonialism has been successful, which is why I insistently try to remind and repeat. We can talk about white bodies and black bodies, but when we talk about whiteness and blackness, it's no longer about the race or skin color. Some people have already been reprogrammed, convinced utterly and completely that the ideology of whiteness is correct. They will enact it, they will die for it. Indeed. And they will do this without remorse. And what is more complicated is they will look you in the eye and say, no, I am not following the ideology of colonial whiteness. You will explain to them their actions one by one. You will put it in the context of history and knowledge, etc., etc., and they will say, no, I am not following the ideology of whiteness. You see, they will say, no, I am following Jesus Christ. But also, like I say, they have no concept or context of the construction or invention of white Jesus after the 1500s. You see, they have no concept or context of all of the meetings that happened in the Vatican and elsewhere, where books in the Bible were chosen, other decisions were made. They have no concept or context for why certain stories in the Bible happened the way they did based on the political history of that region at the time. Some of them even think Jesus wrote the Bible, even though the first book, was picked up long after Jesus died. And you see, They won't even look at that logically, because to them, they are doing what is right, not what is white. So, regardless of all logic and explanation of it, they will continue to fight this battle because they are not conscious. They are not awake. They are not asleep. And any attempt to change that idea, they will feel so strongly, just like whiteness in Europe, they will feel so strongly that they are going to die and be killed. They will make themselves the victims, right? Just like colonialism did. What happened? We are the light that is fighting against this darkness that is encroaching on Europe. No one was encroaching on them. They went out to kill people. You see? Now you have evangelical Christians on the African continent saying we are fighting for the light of Jesus on this darkness that's encroaching. They even use the same rhetoric, right? But if you explain to them that it is it, they'll say no, it has nothing to do with whiteness or European ideology. And that is the trouble, folks, when we do not focus on learning about the world, learning about who we are. We will utterly do the completely incorrect thing and be convinced that we are absolutely in the right, regardless of all logic that shows, that we are not. So we start to manifest the same cognitive dissonance that occurred during the era of colonialism and slavery.
That terrain that you are is very important. It's very important. It's critical. Now, I want to give you an instance, and then I'll ask your opinion. You see, a couple of years ago, there was an event that was organized in the city where I am, which is Verona in northern Italy. And the events were taking place inside a cinema. So different people were asked to come and sing. Then I saw a group of Nigerians. They came out to sing. And of course, I was expecting that maybe they were going to sing maybe a song that maybe represent them or something like that. But instead, they come to sing a gospel song, gospel music, Christian music, no? Maybe that is perfectly fine. Now, what is your name? Who are you? If my mission now is to evangelize Europe about Christianity, I think something is wrong here. Because everybody is called upon to share your culture. They share their culture. They are very convinced of that because it have helped them to conquer the world. But me, now who have been conquered, I still want to use that as my culture to share with them when we are called to the table to discuss human culture. Something is missing.
Well, maybe that's where, like I say, now we are European, you see. So what we demonstrate in that time is not that we are African, but that we have been civilized. So they can accept us now. I don't know. And also, like I say, it's okay to believe in what we want to believe, right? But if we follow that notion of personhood, we understand that everything we are and the situation we are comes from a historical place. And I must be aware of what that historical place is, which makes me aware of what my actions do, right? We do actions, but our actions do something, you see? Like when we plant a seed, it doesn't end there. The planting of the seed results in the plant. So what seed was being planted in that context that you describe? In my reading, I'll say that it was a performance of colonized people performing how well they've been colonized, right? And also maybe it was strategic to make everyone else feel safe, right? To make Europe feel safe about them being there. We'll sing something they're familiar with and they approve of. Look at those good Christians. We taught them well. It's okay. They can be here now, right? Or maybe, I don't know what the conference was. Was it a cultural conference or a political one or whatever?
Of course, it was a cultural conference. And of course, this is not the only first time. I've seen it repeated a number of times where we come to come and sing. We sing gospel.
Yes, exactly. That's how successful colonialism was. Indeed. And don't get me wrong, I love old gospel music and Christian music, old Christian music. I think they're beautifully composed, just like I love some Euro-Western classical music as well, right? But when that becomes the standard for how we represent ourselves, that may then be a problem, right? That may then be a problem, sincerely. Um, and I don't know how to say this without maybe offending somebody, right? But do they really think or do they believe that they are seen by all European Christians as equal to them?
I don't think
Do they
so.
really believe that? Right?
Maybe
Because there's still Christians to this day, Euro descended Christians who believe that only white people will be in heaven, right? Or who are still manifestly racist in their behaviors and their interactions, just like they were during slavery, right? Where they wouldn't even mix in churches and things like that. So, do these people who are singing that truly believe that these people who believe in a white Jesus, which is a lie, right, also believe that these Black Africans are equal to them under the eyes of a white Jesus, who Europe had to make white in order for their version of Christianity to work?
I have a confrontation with some, and this is what they tell me,
Mm.
that Europeans are not good Christian, are not the real Christian, that they Africans are the real Christians.
You see the face that
I'm
I'm making.
I'm not making
Uh-huh.
it up. Not one, not two have told me this,
Yeah.
that it is now their job to evangelize Europe. Taking a book that is written by the European that you have just got it. The Bible was kept by Vatican for several years. Nobody could have access to it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
after finally they make it available to you, they are the fake Christians. You are the real
Yes.
Christians. Something is missing there.
Yes. And also, like, I mean, if we understand, like, the oldest, earliest copy of the Bible is one of a Coptic Ethiopian Bible, and so forth. I say, if you want to be the real Christians, the African Christians, maybe go and talk to the Ethiopian Christians, who are the oldest Christians in Africa, if not the world. Maybe they'll have something to teach us about actual Christianity. But this idea of evangelizing to the West, and also this obsession with evangelizing, you know how very different that is, or I would actually say how un-African that is. This idea of saving souls and running around saving souls, running around trying to save the world from itself, right? Which was also the excuse for colonialism and slavery. Who are you to run around and try to save the world? What is the world doing so wrong at this time that you need to run around and evangelize? Do they not see the irony themselves of evangelizing the word of white Christ, the same word that was used to oppress them? And the word in itself is good, but what are you doing trying to go and save Europe when Africa has enough saving that needs to be done by itself, for itself, rather than depending on Europe? So you're bringing the Bible back to them that they brought to you while you still have things to figure out in your own country. While in your own country, you're saying bad things about your own people for their traditional beliefs, which have existed much longer than Christianity. Indeed. And do they even have knowledge about all the other Christs that have happened before the Jesus Christ, that and so forth? Because they don't want to read those books about the history of the Christs themselves. Right? There's a wonderful book called The 16 Christs and so forth. Right, among many other texts on these ideas of Christs throughout history, and so that closed-mindedness of this one thing that I've chosen is correct. And I will simply say, so the one thing that you were given by a violent and cognitively dissonant West that had to invent a white Christ is the thing that you will now follow and use to not only oppress yourself, oppress your own people at home, and now you want to re-evangelize it back to the people who wrote the syllabus for you without knowing fully the context of where that book even comes from. You see? So there's many levels and layers of cognitive dissonance, and people will rather die protecting the Bible and fighting for white Jesus than sitting down and having reasonable conversations about a larger nature of spirituality and divinity.
All right, that is something to touch there a little bit so that people don't think that we're just talking about a pacifist situation. It is actually violent. That these African evangelical are sometimes very violent. And this is also evident is the way that they talk.
Yes, not just the way they talk. They protest, they beat up people, they, they go and make rules that are very sexist as well at times in their churches and so forth. They actually materially reenact colonialism, like physical violence, mental violence, etc., and harassment of people, you see.
And that is plus the destruction of our cultural artifact. Now, I'll give you an instance of that too. You see, one of the richest deposits of African artifacts in the world, I think it should be in the Vatican Museum. Now, in the city where I am, which is actually Verona, northern part of Italy, there is a museum here known as the African Museum. If you go to New York, Paris, London, you see all these different museums there. Now, let's break it down a little bit. This African Museum are called African Museum because the content of the museum are African artifacts. Okay, but what are African artifacts? African artifacts are sculptures or cultural relics that were created by African people, and they were often used in religious situation, for cultural situation, for spiritual situation, for praying and all of that. You see, before I was talking about Elimoto, which is a second phase of the traditional dance in my place. Now, the masquerade that came out in the afternoon have masks. Now, those masks at a point will be conserved in a place. And it is used for cultural activity by the people.
Yes.
Those are examples of what is in the museum in Europe. Now, let's get it a little bit clearer now. Most of the museums in Europe, at least the one that I was making reference to, are owned by European missionary. And the thing that they took away from Africa, Congo, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, in many other parts of Africa, are the original copy. A good example will also be the Benin. The Benin happened after the British invaded Benin, these people took away the original copy. Nothing else was left. There was not like they took a picture of, they took the original copy. And before they took original copy, what happened? Most African people actually give it to them, like, take, because it is devil, take. Because they have been told that these things are devil. They are worshiping devil. And because we're talking of the evangelical, I want somebody to understand that some of these evangelical, they actually organize their protest, they will build down a shrine. This has happened in Nigeria.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the violence.
To what extent can we demonstrate our foolishness?
You're right.
Please, your take.
Right. Oh, and you got me started on these artifacts now. Oh, my goodness. You see, this matter of artifacts, the other day I was on Instagram, and a page came up of these African art dealers. And I kid you not, they were talking about these African artifacts being sold for 9 million euros, 9 million euros, 2 million euros, 6 million euros, 9 million euros, these masks, and like you say, these ritual artifacts, right? So again, these are stolen artifacts. Let's make no mistake about it. These are stolen. This is looting, right? And they're looting from a context where they went there and told people that this stuff was worthless, it was not valuable, and it was evil, right? And now those same things are a big part of the European economy and being traded for millions of dollars that Africa will never see. That's number one. Let's say that. And thank you for noticing in museums, again, these lootings are still there. There are movements now trying to reclaim these artifacts, but Europe is still holding on, saying, no. You see, now they've put a monetary value on it, and it's locked within that monetary value as well. So again, that colonization is extensive. They won't just say, we're sorry, you can have these back. Because now they've built and incorporated systems around these things that are of high economic value, right? of the things that they said were evil and they burnt and they stole and whatnot. That's point number two. And I'm very passionate about this one. The third idea is this. In the context of art, like you say, right? In Euro-Western art, something just hangs on a wall so you can look at it and so forth. But in the context of African art, everything had its purpose. And I'm going to say purpose rather than function, because the West came and said, yes, African art is functional, like industrial functionalism, like an axe or a hoe. No, I say it has its purpose within the larger context of the community and the understanding of the world. And these things are now just sitting in glass cases or hanging on walls, just there, with all of the material and spiritual energy they hold with them, right? So now they are just held hostage there. Basically, that art is being held hostage. That's what I'm going to say. And it's very, very frustrating because along with those costumes are the meanings, right? Those artifacts are the meanings that they carry in their original context. And they are also a material connection to our African histories, to our ancestors closer, right? To us, because somebody made those in a context and they made them for us. They do not make them for Europe. They definitely do not make them for European museums. They made them for us and for our purposes. Because at that time, we were there unborn. Remember, personhood, the unborn are a part of us. At that time, they made them for their unborn, which is us. And now they are stolen. So that's that. So I'm very passionate. I'll keep that one short. I'm very passionate about these artifacts being held hostage. Now, this idea of evangelicals going and burning shrines and so forth, like I said before, you will look them in the eye and explain to them, this is the same thing that the colonizing missionaries and the colonizing Christians did to Africa. They came and they violently burnt our shrines, our possessions, our histories, our libraries. Right? Because that shrine is not just a shrine for worship. In the African context, it is also a library of knowledge because it is a symbol. It is so you tell them, you look them in there and say, you are doing exactly what they did. And they say, no, we're doing this for Jesus. We're doing it to save somebody's soul. So enacting violence on somebody's physical current existence translates into saving their spirit. You explain to them that this is exactly what the colonizer and the oppressor did. They will say, no, we are doing it for white Jesus, right? To save our soul, right? To save from what? Then you try to explain to them, in most African contexts, there is no heaven and hell. Who are you to show up and say that your God who puts people in hell is better than our God who loves us as we are and allows us to live our life? You are fighting for somebody who, like white people, is willing to put people in prison for eternity. That's your understanding of your creator, right? As an evangelical, right? So you are fighting for somebody who's willing to imprison people and keep them under their thumb just to obey them, rather than somebody who says, hey, live well, and things will turn out as they do based on how you live. So you're basically fighting for a colonizer divinity or a colonizing deity as well. Because again, you see that when I say that they also imprison God and they imprison the concept of God and they enslave God, they are fighting for an enslaved God, a God who was enslaved through the ideology of oppressors and white. So it's a full circle of this. But again, if you look at them, and you tell them this, like most people who suffer from deep cognitive dissonance, they will close their ears, they will yell louder, and they will just yell at you, sinner, sinner, sinner. And they will burn things and beat you up. They will everything because they have the right to do it based on their white Jesus. So that's the type of pathology we are dealing with. So when we talk about whiteness and the European, I sincerely say this over and over, to not confuse how I use those words, just as Tawanda. When I talk about the European, I'm also talking about the African or any other indigenous person with the enslaved mind, right? Just as much as I'm talking about white bodies and white European descendants who might enact those things as well. And that is something I will always repeat very clearly in these conversations.
Thank you so much for that. Now, you describe the evangelical as the new colonizer, and I would like to expand on that. And before that, I would also like to give an example so that people understand how serious this situation is. Now, in Nigeria, recently, a couple of years ago, there were research study that were done on how many parents were actually violating their children because in the churches, they were told that these children are responsible for the suffering of the family, that the children were witches. There were reports of parents pouring acid on their children.
Wow.
There were reports of parents literally killing their children. The same report show children be abandoned because they could not be cured of the witches and wizardry that they had. And of course, many evangelical in Nigeria that were very powerful came up to speak. And they were sort of saying, because some journalists came up now, and you see, for example, Harry Potter, you talk about witches there. This is how we treat our witches here. From the European context, when it is in their interest, it is right. If it is not in their interest, it is wrong. So that when we talk of the evangelical, we're talking of the people who are being given resources to be able to do what they are doing. And of course, in this network of mafia, where they basically are ripping up the poor, where a pastor that have a private jet, the people from where he's getting the money cannot even afford 3 square meal in a day. Nigeria is booming with this industry. It's a huge industry. The biggest establishment, kind of buildings in Nigeria are churches. They export that to the diaspora too.
Yes.
Because what is happening in Africa is happening also to the African diaspora. So that when you talk of this new slaveholder, the Nigeria or the African evangelical are actually a good copy of the new slaveholder. Please say something more about that.
Yes. And it's funny you mentioned that as an export, because even within Africa, there are many evangelicals from Nigeria who set up camp in different parts of Africa as well and build the same system as well. And also South African pastors and things of that sort. We actually have one famous Zimbabwean pastor who's doing the same in the United States as well. So it's problematic, more than problematic. You see, this is a very predatory behavior. They are predators. And preying on suffering is what happens. And taking advantage of people's lack of knowledge, you see, is what happens. Because one thing that colonization does in a beautiful way, or many forms of oppression do, is they create a mode of dependence. When people live in a modality of dependence rather than independence or sustainable interdependence, people's minds can be swayed very easily. When people are so used to having power taken out of their hands and put in somebody else's hands, eventually they are just willing to give that power away. And because, again, of cognitive dissonance, and just this repeated narrative, many people now in these evangelical cultures believe that material wealth and well-being is a sign of spiritual advancement, is a sign of God's love, is a sign of God's providence. The more money you have and more material things you have, the more God loves you, and the more it shows you are doing the right thing. Now, when you ask them to read where in the Bible it says that, you'll get so many answers and so many different wrong interpretations of it, right? But this is literally what's happening now. People in poverty think that joining these churches will alleviate their poverty. So they will give away their money in order to make money in this system. right? Or at least to be told that they are going to heaven. Let's remember that in the some of the Middle Ages and so forth, that the Catholic Church was making people pay for confession, literally paying to go to heaven, right? This is what's happening in this new evangelical situation at a much larger scale, of course. And it's hilarious because also it's not only Africans who are prone to this. In this contemporary situation in the United States, around these election times and over the last few years under the Trump presidency and things, some people, the evangelical people, thought he was a messenger from God. And the proof of his morality was because of how much money he has. The complications of his bankruptcies and other things don't come in, but this is the logic that's still there, right? That God has favored them because they are wealthy, you see. And that wealth becomes the ultimate sign of God's favor, regardless of the circumstances. And also because these charismatic preachers can easily point out an enemy somewhere else outside of yourself, which is also what the colonizer did and does continually, right? Even as you know, in Italy, where you are, in parts of Europe or elsewhere in the world, they always find an external enemy, right? And it's easy in Europe to say the immigrant is the enemy, regardless of whatever's going on inside the country and the historical reasons for that. An easy outside enemy, right? The same thing with these evangelical pastors. There is your outside enemy. And what do they use? They use an enemy who's already been created for them, the African, right? They forget that they're African and they use the stereotype of the African. They don't know consciously that they're doing, but that's what they're doing. They are suggesting the uncivilized, uneducated, evil, witchcraft working African is that enemy. So they're just recycling the enemy that Europe created for colonization and modernizing it, right? So now people can easily look outside of themselves for an enemy. Salvation is no longer within yourself and within your relationship to the world. Salvation is based on getting rid of something outside of you. You see? And that's how it works. That's how colonization worked. Salvation was based on going and getting rid of indigenous people and native, killing all the Native Americans you can kill and so forth, and taking what's theirs, right? Enslaving all the Africans and killing them and taking what's theirs. Salvation could only be found outside of you, not from choosing more sustainable ways to live, creating more sustainable political and economic systems, creating more harmonious ways of relating to the world and fair trade and all of that, you see, but by creating an enemy. So again, these evangelicals are uninventive. They are unimaginative. And like I said in another talk that we had the other day, right? It's a crisis of the imagination. They are basically recycling colonialism. And it is so blatant. But unfortunately, fighting under the flag of white Jesus is what they want and what they are about. And their superstitious nature is sometimes even worse than those of the, well, often even worse than those they accuse of practicing traditional religions.
All right.
Right?
Talking about
Because they
tradition.
go there, right? They go and they say, oh, this pastor came into the house, closed his eyes, and said, your child is evil. So now I'm going to kill my child. What the hell? Right? Or this pastor says, I'm going to sprinkle some water on you. Now you are safe. You'll make money. Right? This pastor says, buy this elastic band that you put around your wrist and wear it all the time, and you'll be safe and prosperous. You see, and they don't see the hypocrisy and the violence that they're doing. And that is the most important part. Failing to see the violence that you are enacting on another is a very clear sign of this, how would I put it? This, wow, this imperialist pathology, right? And it's consistently recycled. So now they are blind to what's right in front of them. And worse yet, blind to the exact things they are doing. Indeed. And that is what made colonialism and slavery successful, right? You kill your slaves on the plantation, you beat them, and you say, no, I'm not violent. They are lazy, right? I'm not violent. But you are literally beating them. Did you hit them? Yes, but I'm not violent. They are lazy. You see? Right? I'm not violent. They are unchristian. I'm so you go on that. There's no way of getting past that pathology, that failure to see, that blindness, that hypocrisy. And it's a terrible thing because that's the direction much of the world is going in.
Now, looking at that from the point of view of African, and of course, everything that we have discussed in this five-part series, this four-part series, really in depth. Of course, I encourage everybody to see all of them because they are really in depth in each of them. Because we are spending more than 2 hours in some, sometimes more than 1 hour in some, really in depth conversation. Now, there is this thinking that I'm really finding it difficult to, because honestly, I do have very strong opinion about Christianity in Africa and among Africans. But sometimes, just because I want to respect people, I don't want to offend people, I'm not really very vocal on that. But I believe are we at a point. Now, this is what I'm thinking. Somebody have been saved by an external forces, in this case, a European force, or let's call it the white Jesus, because that is very easy for them to understand. Even though they didn't realize that white Jesus was created the other day by an Italian, and therefore the reason he looked like an Italian, because if he were created by a Russian, probably would look like a Russian. And if the artist was a Chinese, white Jesus would have looked like a Chinese. The reason he looked like Italian because he was created by an Italian. Of course, Vatican is in Italy, even though that is it's not really clear whether it's in Italy or part of Italy or inside Italy. But what I'm essentially saying is that because I believe that I am saved by white Jesus, I create enmity between me and my ancestor. In that, I don't know if you have heard of this, that a lot of evangelical, you literally say things like burning and casting the ancestors of the people who are praying. Like, I'm praying now, I will be raining insult on my own ancestor as if they are responsible for my suffering. As if what they have done is why I'm suffering today. But this is what I'm thinking. How can I cause my root? That is my source of life. How can I cause it, like really huge insult on my source? Without then I cannot be here. And I still pretend to have a good life. Now, is it because people don't understand what is meant by ancestors? In our LinkedIn audio room, sometimes I try to be really very simple on that, in that by ancestor, we're actually saying that, okay, you have a father, your father have a father, and that father have a father. That line is what we are referring to as the line of ancestor. Those people that are no longer in the same dimension like you are the ancestors. But how could you insult those people, knowing that without them, you cannot be here? And they easily justify that by the blood of the Lamb, which is by the blood of the white Jesus, they are clean. I don't understand it because I'm not very intelligent. Maybe that's why.
No, I think there's nothing wrong with your perception there. And again, this goes back to that concept of personhood, right? What does it mean to be a person? You understand that our ancestors are a part of us. And that is one central thing of an African understanding of being a person, right? So in order to cut yourself off from those ancestors, what you are doing now is telling yourself that you are now separate. You are alienating yourself from a significant aspect of who you are as a person. Indeed. And in doing that, you're actually doing the project of colonialism for them, because it's not one of the projects of colonialism to alienate you from who you are, from self-knowledge, right? Your ancestors are a part of your self-knowledge. By denying your ancestors, you are denying yourself. Indeed. It's just like by denying your children or throwing acid on your children, right? You are denying your children, which is denying yourself. If you're denying the unborn as well, you're placing yourself into that prime position to be exploited. because you're cutting yourself from all other connections. That idea also buys into exactly what the colonizers did to paint a negative picture of Africans and their ancestors by painting us as lost, uneducated, uncivilized, as if our ancestors did not know what they were doing, as if our ancestors were like animals without any sense of morality, right? Or any consciousness of themselves, without any sense of community or well-being. Indeed. So casting them out is very great as a technique to take advantage of people, right? Because people will no longer have to confront even their own actions if they cast out blaming their ancestors. They no longer have to take responsibility for who they are. I am poor because my great grandmother, my great grandfather. I am poor because my ancestor down the line this, right? I have bad mental health because there's this external spirit or something. Again, you see, pointing to an enemy outside of yourself, right? Imagining an enemy outside of yourself to point at is probably the better way to put it, because you have to imagine something outside of yourself, right? In order for that to happen. So to that, I also say it's a problem. It's very much a problem, because what happens now when you cast out these ancestors, so you can pray to white Jesus, right? Who's not only a fiction, but also whose project was not designed for your black skin. And then after that, you pray to saints from Europe and so forth, their ancestors. Now you're giving away energy to their ancestry, you see, and investing energy and passing spiritual energy to that, and effort and emotional energy and psychic energy into there. So you're putting money into their bank, as it were. If a bank was spiritual, or psychic energy were a bank, right? You're cutting off from your own bank, your own lineage of bank, and putting energy into theirs. For what? For whose benefit? And at the same time, somebody can show you logically and through history how this white Jesus was created. There's a book I'm actually reading currently. I forget the author, but the title of the book is God is a Black Woman, where this author is researching all of the Black Madonnas around Europe. And there are many, I think around 512 Black Madonnas, Black Marys, right? And so forth. And she does simple research showing, I think it was before the year, and I could be wrong, so look this up, but I think it was before 1526. All the older Bible images, the actual Bibles and so forth, right? Like the ones from Ethiopia and so forth, all of them had black saints, and Jesus was portrayed with dark skin as well. And many of the characters were portrayed with dark skin, as would be expected for that region of the Arabic world and Middle Eastern world and so forth, and North Africa. Until that point in time, right? And this is early 1500s. Then they switched and made a decision, right, to make these sacred images of lighter skin. So basically, they moved away from, they changed history in order to create these visuals, right? And this hypothetically was made to make Europeans feel closer to God, right? To identify with God more, so that they might turn to spirituality more easily. But at the same time, what else did it do? What do you think it did in terms of their relationship to people who are not of that color?
It's simple.
Right?
They took the original image, they remake it, the original image, so that
Exactly.
racist people will even be anti-God, the anti-God that they are worshiping.
You see? So now what happens? Isn't it easier now to run around and, while you're oppressing the rest of the world, to say Jesus looks like us, therefore, just by implication, Jesus would be less likely to care about what we're doing to these other people, if they are people at all. But that there was an actual active, not passive action, actual active action to change the complexion of said Christ. You see, so these are things that we just need to consider. And again, nothing wrong to me with Christianity as a religion. right? Not even Christianity. I'll change it. Nothing wrong to me with the sacred texts and the philosophy of Christianity. Just like with Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and so forth. One of my things is I love reading spiritual texts from multiple cultures, and I see the beauty in them, right? The trouble always comes up when we do things like the things that were done by Europe to further their own projects with this. And what's worse is when people fall for that trick and they believe it in the context of this fundamental evangelical religion, right? Evangelical fundamentalism, I'll call it. When they do that, when through ignorance and foolishness, selfishness and greed and materialism, they deny that they are reenacting a cycle of violence that was enacted upon them, indeed. And also just denying the fact that somebody's taking their money and they're putting their future in the hands of somebody else again and again. When most spiritual texts and philosophies tell you that, hey, it's you are deciding day by day what happens. And they kindly ask that you live towards harmony, sustainable living with the world and with those around you, kindness and goodness. It's simple. But somebody can convince somebody that burning a shrine, beating people, throwing acid on a child is the will of their creator. You see?
It's a preemptive act, like you described already before, no? Because it's not like that shrine is actually attacking you at the time you are attacking it, no? Because when you go to the
Just
shrine,
sitting there.
when you go to the shrine, everything is calm. You decide
Yes.
to pour petrol, then you light your matches, it's
Bring
burning.
violence.
Who is
Yes.
fighting you? Who?
No one is fighting you. No one is doing anything. There it goes, right? Mind your own business. And people do this thing where they say, they use the example of when Jesus went into the temple and whipped those people who were selling things and so forth in the temple, right? But in that situation, those people came and they violated the space of the temple because that's not what it was for. They were enacting violence on the temple by doing that, right? It's supposed to be a place of quiet and so forth and what. But these guys, the evangelicals and Christian fundamentalists, they will actively go and seek out things that are minding their own business. And then they say we're being like Jesus, you see. So the cognitive dissonance, it's immense. But also to get back to this idea, right, of music and dance and so forth, there's something about when we move out of the head space of trying to know things through the head, which can be easily fooled and deceived. When we participate with our bodies in some of these songs and rituals and dances and things of that sort, when we understand what true happiness is, what true freedom is, and what true connection with our community and the cosmos is, then there's a possibility for freedom. The things we can understand through our body and training our body to understand those things. Because some people, right, violent people are enacting violence on others, and their bodies are not even trained to recognize the trauma they are inflicting on themselves and on others. They'll keep doing it again and again and not recognizing, like, why is it that I can't sleep? Why is my blood pressure high? What is all of this happening? They don't understand because they have no connection, right, to this, to the body and to knowing things through the body, through the flesh, in simple ways, right? Because empathy is something you can cultivate. You'll know I'm hurting somebody, and you won't want to do it because you feel it in your body. That's the way our bodies are designed, even scientifically. Our wiring, we are designed to recognize suffering. So it actually takes conditioning to move us away from the possibility of living peacefully with each other. And it takes conditioning the body, right? And all of these things. So that's where dance and music come back in again.
So that that guy that was nearly down on the neck of George Floyd didn't have empathy at all, because he should have known that what he's doing is wrong. He should have known that you are kneeling on somebody's neck. You should have known that that is not a piece of wood. You should have known that this is a human being like you. What does it take to understand that? Is that complicated?
Exactly. Or worse yet, imagine what type of conditioning he had to go through in order to lose that aspect of his humanity. And then imagine that that is the conditioning that all of the police are going through. that all of the military are going through. Imagine that that is the training that all Christian fundamentalists are going through, Islamic fundamentalists are going through, this conditioning of training the body towards such an insensitivity, a lack of empathy. And that is what's frightening. What are we conditioning our bodies to do? Right? Even in the age of the internet, the challenges of listening to or watching violent movies, etc., the overwhelming prevalence of pornography and things of that sort. How do certain things condition our bodies in certain ways, right? And shape how we relate to other bodies, more as objects rather than humans.
All right, there is another term that you used there that I would like you to speak on a little bit as we are moving towards the conclusion of today's conversation. I think you call it neo-ancestral. I don't know if you want to expand on that a bit. What does that mean?
Yes. So I'm borrowing that one from the African-American artist and scholar, Dr. Ike Newsom. And he has a book called Soul Stirrers, the neo-ancestral impulse in African-American art. So when we talk about neo-ancestralism, I'm borrowing from this art movement, just like, Cubism, Dadaism, etc., Impressionists, but it's an African-American art movement from the 1960s, and it's called neo-ancestralism. The way this is defined by this scholar in particular is the aesthetic impulses or remnants, these remaining threads and resonances with African cultures, traditional cultures that emerge in the art of the African diaspora, right? Or people or African descendants not living within those traditional contexts. And there isn't a clear explanation as to why those aesthetics are emerging. He looks at these things and notices that throughout the history of Africans traveling around the world and being moved around the world, these aesthetic impulses have continued to show up. Sometimes even the meaning is lost, but the aesthetic is still there, right? And things are happening and being repeated and repeated and repeated. So the ancestral happening in new contexts, right, is really what we're talking about as neo-ancestral. Those the deep structure of knowledge, of African knowledge that manifests much later than this original context. So we have societies in America that have some of these traditions of funerals and so forth and things. And during the slavery in America, the tradition of jumping over the broom as a wedding also, that wasn't just invented. It can be traced down to specific African cultures where jumping over or walking over a stick and so forth represents marriage and things of that sort, right? So when we talk about this neo-ancestral impulse, it's again pointing to that concept of personhood that connects us to our ancestors and the unborn, that no matter what happens through these physical creative practices, such as music and dance and so forth, we are able to preserve and sustain many aspects of our deep cultural knowledge throughout the ages. It may change form a little bit, but we still know it and understand it. So if we see it in jazz music in America as it came up, jazz is a beautiful African-American invention. But in its form and structure, we can see aspects of some Yoruba tradition, some Angolan tradition from Luanda, some South African musical traditions, some etc. Does that make sense? Yeah. And the same thing happens in dance as well. All right. So in some of these dances that happen even in the US, in blues dance, jazz dance, etc., you see some of these things are carried over as well. These embodied practices and these visual aesthetic practices in the art, how some artists use shape and color and form, how some musicians use an instrument in ways that are not traditionally European and so forth, and all of this. That's the neo-ancestral impulse. again. So that fact that the ancestors cannot be killed, the ancestors cannot be regulated, they keep showing up over and over again. And in that way, we can trust and know that our deep cultural knowledge can never be lost, right? And will always be around in one form or another, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Because there are instances of artists elsewhere in the world, away from the continent in Africa, doing certain things. And then later they discover a similar thing being done in Africa. And they had no idea of the meaning of what they were doing. But if you look at the context, somehow that aesthetic emerged organically out of their personhood, right? Or it emerged organically out of their greater personhood through their experiences, community in community, and so forth. So that's really what we're talking about by neo-ancestral, that ongoing life of our ancestral knowledge and our ancestral ways that keeps resurfacing. And again, we have ways of maintaining this, whether it's conscious or unconscious. But if we consciously keep doing our dances and our music and so forth, that's a way of consciously doing it as well. Indeed. Or if we just keep researching as we invent new things, if we keep doing our Sankofa, right? Keep connecting to the past and things of that sort. That's another way of maintaining that neo-ancestral aesthetic, right? Those neo-ancestral impulses in everything we do. Very much.
Thank you so much for that. That is really very important, and it's deep, and it's important for particularly in the diaspora, because we won't be able to connect to the same energy where we are coming from, and to use it for our own good, and for us to be used also for their own good. Because this line is very important, that you are not the end of it. Yes. You are just in the middle, which means between you and what comes before you, and between you and what comes after you, so that it becomes now like you have a responsibility to just maintain the line, just maintain the line, just do what you're supposed to do, because you're not going to put an end to it.
Exactly. It's very, very simple. You are not the last and you are not the first. Indeed.
All right, dance. We look at dance today. We tapped into culture. We tapped into, I like one thing about African culture or African cosmology, that everything is connected to everything else. It is impossible to just take one thing and just treat it as that thing, because that thing must be on its own. It doesn't make much sense. But by the time we start adding culture to it, environment, medicine, science, politics, economy, philosophy, because at the end of the day, we usually do this to make sense out of it. All right. So try to reshape our narrative in the diaspora. What role will dance play on that? What is your recommendation for somebody who have listened to you for this more than 2 hours and is interested? Where should this individual start from? What should he or she do?
Well, I'll begin by saying that the body is not unconscious. The body is not asleep. The body has memory. The body is very much alive. And through the body, we have access to a way of knowing. The body and the mind are not just connected, right? They are actually one thing while being two things. And dance is a way of knowing. Dance is a way of understanding the world. Dance is a way of being a part of the world. And most importantly, dance is a way of connecting to yourself, your personhood. And remember that your personhood is not just about your own personal body. Your personhood connects you to family, community, nature, all of creation, the ancestors, and the unborn. Dance is possible, like music, because of rhythm. And rhythm is also a way of knowing. By dancing, you are partaking in the rhythm of the cosmos and the rhythm of the world. You are understanding how to be a part of the world. And also, remember how much effort was put by certain civilizations in history to keep your dance and your music away from you. And to that extent, you should also put effort into recovering or finding the dances and knowledges and music that were taken away from you. You must invest as much as was invested in keeping things away from you, right? As you must in recovering them. And that's what I would leave to that.
Thank you so much for that. We can really see that you are deeply passionate about this dance, this cultural element, this exhibition that we cannot separate from music. So tell me, as Tawanda, what do you love most about dance?
So every day on the first day of class with all my students, I tell them, just because you are born, just because you exist in this cosmos, in this cosmology, you belong. So for me, what I love most about dance is that it reminds me that I belong and that I have nothing to prove. It reminds me that I am free and that I have choice. And also, I love dance because I get to fall in love with the world every day when I dance, because I understand that I'm a part of. And that's what I like about dance.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That is enough to entice somebody to fall in love with dance. I really
Sure.
appreciate that. So now, how can people find you? Those who want to learn more about what you do and probably get lessons from you about dance, please share with them.
Indeed. You can find me on my Instagram, which is Tawanda Creative. You can also find me on my website, which I will share with my wonderful host Obehi here, and you can find me through there. And also, you can just look up my name on the internet and you'll find many ways to find me. Again, my name is Tawanda Chabikwa.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Tawanda. Now, what would be your final thoughts? Yeah, this has really been a very interesting conversation. So, how would you want to conclude it?
You know, the entirety of existence, the entirety of life is a dance and a song. So participate in dance and music because you'll start to understand more about existence itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, brother. I really appreciate it. These are be full of value. This 4-part interview where we talked about your body of work, the different things that you do from history to dance to AI. We really have gotten a lot of value from you, and we are really indebted to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much and for the work you're doing, and thank you for the invitation.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.